Yeah? All right. Good evening and happy spring summer. My name is Wonju Lim. I'm the chair of the MFA program in sculpture. Before we start, I'd like everyone to know that this event is being recorded. All right. Yeah. I'm happy. And it's okay, Jim, yes?
As long as it looks adorable.
Okay.
That's fine.
Well, I'm so happy that you're here, and it is an honor to introduce Jim Skuldt at this lecture series. Jim Skuldt is a recipient of numerous grants, including the Creative Capital Foundation, Harpo Foundation, the California Community Foundation, and the Center for Cultural Innovation. His work has been exhibited worldwide at venues including Marlborough Chelsea in New York, LTD in Los Angeles, Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, High Desert Test Site in Joshua Tree, California, Friche La Belle de Mai in Marseille, France, and SECONDroom in Antwerp, Belgium. It was around 10 years ago that I saw a performance by Jim Skuldt. It was at an art bar, the Mandrake, located in the Gallery Row of Culver City, California. I went there to meet up with a friend who told me that there will be a performance in collaboration with Alley Cats. What I witnessed was comical, absurd, and a bit troubling, but nevertheless poetic and philosophical. The artist, using 4x8 sheets of cardboard, continuously shifted the layout of the bar to keep a cat from escaping. The cat, I learned, was his own pet and not an alley cat for that performance. He started by closing off a larger area along the perimeter of the bar, then closing in and sectioning off a smaller area, and ended with a medium-sized box with a cat inside. No doubt, if the fire department was present at that time of the performance, the Mandrake would have been shut down. At times, the cardboard sheets were taped to a doorway that led from one area of the bar to another, trapping the customers, making it difficult for us to order drinks, go to the bathroom, sit down with friends, and so on. This is what my memory tells me about that night at the Mandrake. The decisions he made as an artist in this performance/installation were that of a cat catcher. The artist was simply making quick, practical moves, installing, deinstalling, and reinstalling, shifting the location of the cardboard sheets that solved the problem of trapping a cat. But for the customers inside, the same moves served as a problem, intervening the social landscape of the bar. Years later, I was informed that he had been working with stray cats in the neighborhood of his studio as part of a larger performance, a larger project, which included catching them and transporting them to a local spay and neuter clinic. This piece stays in my mind and makes me question my own decision-making process in my studio. In what ways do I negotiate the boundaries of practical and problematic decisions? How much of these decisions were already made for me when I choose to buy materials for my work from places like Home Depot and participate in this capitalist economy? Jim Skuldt is an artist, a problem solver, and a problem maker. Quixotic is the word once used to describe his practice by an art critic. His projects start with an idealistic ambition, setting forth a number of practical problems to resolve that lead to well-meaning and ethical solutions. At the same time, these solutions can be problematic, questionable, or even illegal. His work presses against our culture's answers to social, ecological, environmental, and ergonomic issues. Where do we store our stuff? Do we really need so much stuff? What is the most economic use of my space? What do we do with our waste? And why did Amazon ship that tiny item in such a large package? Shall I use that package to make art? The attempts in finding alternative answers to these questions such as these seem to be the driving force of his practice. Let me end by briefly touching on another project titled Seymour. Since 2006, Skuldt has been working on a project that involves adapting a standard 20-foot shipping container to serve as his own live and workspace on an international journey, whether by boat, train, or truck. Once completed, this piece should be seen First of all, as a sculptural proposition that incorporates the body and the needs of its maker. The formal decision were based on practical questions such as how will the body sustain itself within the confinement of a container over the time it takes to cross the Atlantic or the Pacific? And perhaps more importantly, how will it get rid of its waste? There are other viable questions the artist asked himself. How will I breathe? Do containers ever fall off the ship? Am I worried about pirates? And is this legal? The artist solved most of these problems. Hopefully he will share with us tonight. He did succeed in being transported from the east coast of the United States to Marseille by being on a passenger aboard a container ship occupying an unused officer cabin. This served as a mission to assess how the larger project was to proceed. But the legal issues involving shipping himself, that is to say, shipping himself not as a passenger, but as an object, is still yet to be resolved. The project did not succeed in being shipped to Singapore, to Hamburg, or to any of the destinations initially proposed. At least not yet. I wonder if it ever will. But for now, as long as the authorities, such as the International Ship and Port Facility and the Border Control, excludes the living body as an object, we know that the project will remain a romantic fantasy without a conclusion, without the satisfaction of an arrival. Ultimately, art is not about an arrival, but an ongoing search for what is possible, what is unanswerable, accepting failure as one of many versions within the potential. But we as artists, we keep searching. As far as we know, Bastian Otter's famous last work, In Search of the Miraculous, in which he attempted to cross the Atlantic aboard a small yacht, never arrived. On this sentimental but hopeful note, please help me in welcoming Jim Skuldt. Oops, sorry.
All right. Thanks,
I don't know where you want to.
Wow.
Okay.
I don't know, that was good. I have to say that's the best intro I've ever heard of me. You know, maybe that covers it, right? So, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to answer any of those questions. I'll do my best. Maybe I'll do my best to avoid them. But yeah, I think so. Let's see. I did a few studio visits earlier, and that was a pleasure. I live in New York. I'm up here just for the day, and this reminds me of when I wanted to show you some work from when I started grad school, because it was a very tumultuous time in my practice, and it really informed for me a lot of how I still approach my work, which is like kicking and maybe not screaming, but so I showed up in, well, I'll show a video. It's really the fastest thing I can show, but I showed up in, I lived in New York about 20 years ago, and I got into grad school there, but I decided I wanted to get out of there, and went to California. I showed up and I went to California because the studios are enormous, you know. They're like 20 foot, blah, 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 you know, vaulted ceilings and everything. And I showed up to find out they had overbooked the program, and they gave me this cubicle downstairs, and I was so extremely bummed because I had literally just driven across the country for 4 days, and you know, had my van and got there and da-da-da. And this was like, you know, welcome Jim, here's your studio. And I was like, shit, SVA had a bigger studio. And it was like, this is, okay, so I kind of scratched my head for a while, and then I decided I was gonna drive back, and then somebody said, well, just think a little bit, use a little, you know, think outside of the box. What can you do? And then I found this kind of corrugated material in the back sculpture yard, and I was like, oh, I'll build a lean-to. That's a great idea. I'll build a studio out there. And then I was like, no, that's like, suddenly it just like clicked, and I was like, I'm going for broke. I'm going all the way. And so I built a structure and embedded it in a slab of concrete. And I'm going to show you a quick video because it explains it faster than I can. See if the volume is... Oh, I'm bumping the microphone here. Okay. All right. Hello. Whoa.
The fasting the legs and if the ivory reduce the fills I hear that and it allows the Lord was on in the zoo and freely offer the zoo is also at the tree in the back of the as it was and choose the area where it's called the is which the two option was the zoo's the very where you see there between the lyric represent which now find for the Hawaii basket. I also thank you for the area. How the earth seems to brought it baby. The river and the ceiling of the voice at the hours when no one will hurt me. And the leaves out the directions. The bench beneath other privilege we radically welcome as the reading of these and the John was more with the social.
Got a lot of manpower here. We're pretty much just drilling and...
There's no sense in provoking something that really tends to be an irritant. Trust is all you need, you know? That's the way I see it.
I admire reasoning more sharp. I believe in years of these. Truly, best all of it. I would find it and independent, but it more than something. But through it, these learnings of a sex child with a child.
Because when you're really in some trouble, the Lord will come through for you. Kind of like to keep out of trouble.
I will see many Mr. Mouse through this band. Ultimately, I stood out the back by a minute, and then a real cloud surrounded the school. But birthday is still there.
Okay. It's not there anymore. It was there when I made this, but it was up for years, and they started to teach installation classes out of it. It was really bizarre. And then I was asked to take it down. It was a whole thing. And it started me on a path of really, it's an interesting thing because it was kind of like some kind of like spatial claim to, and it was a public space, it was a space for the students, but it was also privatized. I had it locked. And there were a series of break-ins. It was amazing. Like there were just all these things that happened after the work happened. The work kind of continued on. So that became a thing that was like, it got me on this path of these super long-term things that were also touching on like certain issues. I'll just play you another video real quick.
Lại cũng phải nghĩ làm sớm about what you are doing and doing. And there's I'm not this is this later it's also friend in the transmission in regards to my size function in space and the time. This is your side by calling it is not a first group so travel the movie to the countries here somewhere. Takes 49 hours and the distance every morning exist. I developed the layers and maps which use as headlines from further transmission. But first, I'm back at reality, which I can build easily to really trigger the short files and trust. I'm spending, I'm back at Florence, South Summoner, and New York, North Style. The solution for some, the person interest of the things, so swap it. I found this and was, but the ships and us, but then by piece, by Rockman, more about Richard message to the experience, the thinking jumbo, what letters, for protection, actually, in the backpack. And well, in the backpack, but it's from my environment.
I guess it's sort of like an exclusive club, you know? You pay the membership dues, you know? We just try to keep it real, you know?
All right, so obviously I was trying all kinds of different stuff at that time. And there was, yeah, I don't know. It was kind of a moment where I was involved in all these things that were, I was doing this thing, this spatial kind of like contentious thing, manifest destiny kind of thing, and then there was this, and very, very tongue-in-cheek and also very concerned with sort of what was going to happen. And then I made this shift of going to CalArts where it was like suddenly everything's supported and very like, it's all okay. So it definitely put me in a mode of where like, well now if I'm supposed to do, there was a lot of questioning in my mind about what my role was in school and stuff. I remember that, or like what I could get out of it, or what I could, you know. And so while I was there, I started, you know, they were like, you could do anything here. So I'm like, cool, I'm gonna just make flat objects like this, you know, and just to be a problem. I mean, just to be like, do something that I thought was like, you know, oh, you'd love working with this guy, or, you know, Michael Asher, or da-da. And I was like, he was great. But I was also like, I'm going to make these maps, you know. And these kept me really busy. There's like, these are maps. A lot of you don't know what these are, but these are things on paper. No, just kidding. And I cut them apart with a knife, and then I glued them together on paper. Yeah, so anyway, and these are like, they're very precise, and there's like even the street names, I was kind of like paying attention to what the street names were and putting those in and stuff like that, so there's a lot of detail. Yeah, okay. For example, I mean, things like Dodger Stadium becomes Yankee Stadium. There were name associations that I was trying to swap things that were associated by similar names, similar functions, similar demographics. Like in this small area here, kind of downtowny area, you know, I cut out, maybe like in that small square over there, I cut out like 17 little sections, like for the garment district, and you know, Union Square becomes blah blah blah. What's it called? Yeah. Anyway.
What area are you talking about?
Downtown. Can we see it? It's a little pixely. Union Station. I couldn't read that, I just remembered. Anyway, all right. Let's see. I was also doing this stuff. So when I was doing these transmissions with radios and stuff, I was doing all these synchronized transmissions. So I was sending signals and sending them to multiple radios and stuff like that. I applied to a program broadcasting it to, like I mailed them a radio and broadcast it to them. All this kind of stuff that was like ostensibly a huge waste of time. But that's what it's all about, wasting your time. So I was also doing I kind of made this shift into like making these performances of with multiple like amplifiers and playing kind of cacophonous concert-y kind of end of the concert kind of moment things into multiple amplifiers through at the time DVD players that were stacked. And it could be anything. But they were kind of making these, and all the lights were off and making these nighttime landscapes, or kind of like cityscape type of things with lights and stuff. Kind of a walking hazard kind of thing. And I talked to, I started thinking about trying to build some kind of structure for this, for my, again, this is still grad school work, and I was thinking about, like, what can I do, as a final show. And so I was thinking about building some kind of stagey kind of like thing there. And then I got a tip about this thing, and I was immediately interested. This is a stage, a pre-existing stage that I didn't have to build. It's the stage that belonged to Neil Diamond. Many of you might not know who he is, many of you do, but he's a arguably slightly cheesy, popular figure, singer-songwriter. And I was not a huge Neil Diamond fan, but I suddenly became his biggest fan. I went through great lengths to acquire this stage, and then was stuck with what ended up being a very interesting problem. So this picture I found on the internet, I did not have much to go on about. This is a huge thing. This is 16 meters in diameter. It's 48 feet wide. And it's a dual ring, kind of circular, rotating stage. It's got a motor in the middle. It's like the middle part's called the cake. It goes up and down into like sort of what looks like a 3-layered wedding cake, and then back down. And Neil, I can just sort of swivel as he's going up and down. But what I ended up getting in this process was this huge collection of images that were like, it was like a research project. This was like a moment where this is slightly, like this, Google was just starting to be a thing, this was not like a big, like, hey, everything's online, So I found these images of the stage to try to understand how to build it. Super complicated, actually. And then when I acquired it, I got all these pictures of this inventory that people had taken, this photo inventory of the stuff. This photo inventory was useful, sort of, because the stuff was huge and I couldn't move it by myself. And it was on all these big carts and stuff. And, I was a grad school kid. I didn't have like a huge studio with a bunch of people to help me out. So these pictures are very telling, though, like people looking at this stuff, like, what is it? Or, anyway. So this stuff became a part of like this sort of photo documentation of this kind of collection of photos that was handed to me, kind of secondhand photo documentation. That thing's called an elephant step. It says on the package, do not use as drum. Then I got this picture, which I labeled, but my goal was to tour this state. I had various like cockamamie ideas of how I would handle this thing. And one of them was to tour it worldwide as an object. And that hasn't happened. But I also wanted to distribute, my thought was, I was very interested in the idea of distribution, of distributing objects spatially and temporally so that they would have sort of an existence as nodes or something. There's kind of this communication of some kind. And so I kind of broke it down into the speaker stuff, light stuff, stage stuff. And the thesis show I ended up doing was I assembled as much as I could fit into the largest studio, the largest gallery space at Cal Arts I put in there. I had to remove a big bunch of the scaffolding up there, and I also had to bolt this stuff called Unistrut up there, which is like structurally mega beefy solid stuff to hold up stuff. And I set off so many times, set off the earthquake alarm trying to do that, because it's like, and like they had to shut it off to let me do it. It was like a big thing. Like I learned how to get along with the facilities folks, you know. It was this is called 2-ton speaker cluster cranked, which meant it was actually plugged into the most beefy amplifiers that I could get my hands on, and then just playing nothing. So it was playing white noise loudly, and it was slightly intimidating. It was sort of like the sound of like, you don't want it to make the pop sound that you hear when you know, if you hear a pop, it might feel bad. Anyway, so that, by the way, is Darcy Hubler, who's like one of the smallest, one of the most petite people who could possibly be the model for the large thing there. So it is big, but I also have to fess up that that's like a small human. Many years later, so I was trying to do something with this thing for a long time, and many years later, this came together at an exhibition at LTD that Jan Tumler curated. That, basically, at some point I made a huge selection. I had this stuff for years, and it was stressful because time is money, space is money, money is money, and we're all here super temporarily. So I realized that every minute I had this stuff, I was like not doing other stuff, and so when it happened, I was like, great. But I also, in the meantime, had to make some super hard decisions about like, how am I going to actually continue to keep this stuff? And my idea had shifted at some point to like bury all the parts around the world, and that also didn't happen. It was sort of like trying to bury it in collections as a joke, but that didn't happen. And what did happen is I got rid of a huge amount of the stuff. I got rid of the most of the outer ring of the whole stage, and kept the cake, which I thought was the cake being the middle part again, which I thought was the craziest part of it all. It was really the most interesting thing, and the very outer disco light kind of things here, which I ended up setting up as kind of disco elements, and so. Okay, here's some footage. So I set it up, I installed it. These are aircraft landing lights. This is called the Crop Circle International Cake Plug, and it's meant to plug up crop circles worldwide. And it's like, these are aircraft landing lights, so they're very high voltage lights, and it's going up and down with a motor. I installed it upside down because I wanted to sort of highlight or foreground the roady aspects of the stage as opposed to the spectacular part. So I wanted it to be more about I wanted to draw attention to the sort of underbelly of the stage process and the assembly and disassembly, which I'd been interested in for years, how this thing fits together and comes apart and moves around and gets shifted as a bulk spectacular object. And, it's kind of active and dormant and active and dormant. Here's... Oh yeah, by the way, so this performance I end up doing is like, well, I'll show you first, yeah. So that was basically me performing the stage to music that nobody else could hear. That was based on the best thing that I found out of the entire this entirely gigantic amount of physical objects that originally took up 3 40-foot shipping containers, and then I had stored in my studio in 2 20-foot shipping containers, and the studio was 3,000 square feet of it was a meatpacking plant that was enormous freezers, walk-in freezers, and taking up a lot of space. So the best thing that I found out of that whole thing was a piece of paper, a stack of paper that was printouts of Excel spreadsheets with all the songs of Neil Diamond for each concert in the tour, and the number of rotations that he was going to turn clockwise or counterclockwise for each song. That was amazing. So the whole thing it was called a Turntable Setlist, and then I performed it based on those sort of numbers. So this is a container that I picked up to get the stuff, only to discover, so again, here's the thing, really big, and only to discover very shortly afterward that, and this was, there was a time constraint on me picking up this stuff, and I realized that I needed to get a studio really quickly. I had just gotten out of grad school. I needed a studio really pronto, and I was looking all over the place. This is in Los Angeles, and I found a derelict meatpacking plant, and I took it, and there was a parking lot there, which I was glad I could use, and I was like, I can put some containers here and fill it up with stuff. And then I realized after I got it, and after I got the 40-foot shipping container, that the container was not going to fit around the alley corner into the parking lot. So I got really used to working fast and loose with numbers and containers. It was it was sort of preposterous, because I realized you could just just do that. And I got that container, sold it, got 2 more 20-foot containers and put it in the parking lot, and filled that up with stage stuff. What's next? Here's the layout of the studio. The studio is a meatpacking plant, which means it had giant walk-in freezers and refrigerators. This place was disgusting. It was so full of cockroaches when I got it. It was flooded with sewage when I got it. So I got a super good deal. It was flooded with sewage. And I went to Home Depot and rented power washers and a bunch of bleachy stuff, and cleaned it up. It took me forever. And I ended it was just completely destroyed, and I ended up ripping doors off and putting new doors on. And by the time I left, I had it for 7 years, and by the time I left, I had 8 people working there too. It was kind of like I wanted to have a bit of some energy there. So that was good. Anyway, I was sort of obsessed with trying to get this meatpacking plant working again. And so I'm going to play you another video which can explain it faster than I can.
Within the walls of the former meatpacking plant in East Los Angeles, made up of industrial walk-in freezers and refrigerators, powered by large condensers and compressors, resuscitated, revamped, and repurposed to create and sustain cold. Iceland, where water will freeze and expand, dedicated to the seeking out of unusual, majestic, and compromised forms, to new achievements, to the reconsideration of the things around us, of things reaching up, of things hanging down, rusticles, soda straws,
that became a part of, so at some point this was curated into the California Biennial, which was, this was I don't know if any of you know what relational aesthetics is. It sort of came and went, I think, thankfully. But yeah, it was a moment where everybody was supposed to do stuff that's fun and social and invite everybody over and you hang out and you just like, yeah, okay. And enjoy it for like its connective relations. I guess Facebook is the new relational aesthetics, maybe. It has an aesthetic. Anyway, I suddenly was asked to figure out how to, so I was told they were, well, okay, how do I say this? I was told they were going to get a sponsor. So my proposal was to fill up the biggest room there with cold beer. And just like, but see, the thing was, there was this idea of having it be this big kind of like fun party. And I was like, I don't want this to be a big fun party. This is not a big fun party. This is like, I mean, because this whole space for me had this huge like dark kind of like, you know, kind of residue in it. And it sort of for me felt like this is like a place where somebody opens the door and like just, you know, you go over there and you open the door and they hand you a beer and then they close it. Okay, there you go. And you're supposed to just like leave or something. I don't know. But it was, somehow I was kind of like trying to come up with this way to make this thing work where it's like full of beer. And I was like doing these calculations, which this has a lot to do with a lot of the way I think my work ends up getting processed is just these kind of like ridiculous kind of calculations, like cans or bottles, you know, and then a lot of numbers. 2,800 cases full, 6,058 cases full. So, and ultimately, and so this, and I was, you know, being asked to come up with the date for the opening, and I had joked with somebody about doing it during Thanksgiving dinner so that, you know, it would be less of a relational aesthetic-y kind of thing. But the funny thing to me was that this space for me just represented some kind of like, in the catalog for the biennial, I was asked like what one would expect in a visit to Iceland, which is what I called this studio. And I related it to the an experience I had in 2nd or 3rd grade where there was a field trip to the Wonder Bread factory. And I had to go to the dentist that day, so I didn't get to go to the Wonder Bread factory. So it just remained this like super amazing trip in my head that I would never ever experience or see. And so that's how I kind of pictured a trip to Iceland being just this thing that was unattainably amazing, yet unattainable. And it's the only project that was not realized in that biennial. Like it was such an overreaching project. Like the curator said, like, well, I'm going to show this and this and this and this and this and this, and it was like grossly underfunded. This is like part of what working large looks like. It's like, cool, we're gonna get you a sponsor, and they don't, and then they say, so figure it out, you know, good, whatever you want to do is cool. All right, cool. So I'm gonna fill this thing with 6,058 cases of beer and like put a bunch of stuff into it. So it was not doable. It was not something that I could do. And it was like, this is part of the process, you know, like, yeah, it's part of the process of putting together huge proposals and huge work. And the great thing was this thing was a part of, you know, like it remained what I kind of was looking for. It was in the catalog. Nobody went there, you know, except people that knew me. You know, it's like kind of like how it was like a dream come true. And because it was still in action, but it was like not turned into this sort of shit show that I didn't want it to be. Anyway, so I was thinking a lot about rinks and things like that too, kind of like the sort of proportions and markings of spaces and stuff, and being asked to come up with these kinds of diagrams of, preposterous labeling of like, there's the blower. But it was a really big space, and meanwhile, all the stage stuff is still there. So I'm trying to like sort of figure out how to get this thing in there. And I was like, I had like done drawings to like sort of propose installing the cake that I showed years afterward in there, and it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Like it's sort of and I think it's a good thing that it didn't happen really, because it would have been. Maybe not. Maybe it would have been amazing. It might have been amazing. I don't know. One of the other things that was up with this studio was that it was disgusting. And so at some point I started living, the studio is the lower level, and at some point I started living upstairs. There were apartments up there. For a while I lived in the studio, which had no windows. I do not recommend it. It was part of the process of learning whether I wanted to live in my studio or not, which at this point in my life is absolutely not, It's maybe something people try, and I think I encourage you all to try it until you can't stand it. But I lived upstairs, and the people who ran this meatpacking plant formerly lived upstairs, and so it's kind of like a self-cleaning oven where they would go upstairs and downstairs and upstairs and downstairs and run the whole show. And so I did that too, and my neighbors had been there for a while. They had their own practices in place of how to like keep this space orderly, and basically they're profuse litterers. And I was into it. I don't know, at first I was like disgusted by it. And I one time said, hey, do you mind, which I knew was not going to happen. I knew it was not my place, or, it's not, just like I was like drop bombing myself into an entire structure of life that wasn't, I had no say in it. But I could observe it, and the one thing that made it palatable for me, the one thing that made it interesting for me was that I started documenting the whole thing. And I began what was a tongue-in-cheek bloggy thing. Are blogs still a thing? Do they exist? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, because I felt like they came and then they died, and then it's just like there's something else. Like there's something called like, what do you call it instead? Instagram. You know what I mean? I don't know. Yeah, so it was just this thing where I started taking pictures of it, and for a year I documented all the trash droppings. And again, I'm going to show you a video that can show you.
Yes, at times it was overwhelming, but it dawned on me that somewhere in these details, within the tragedy, the intrigue, there was a process in motion, and that maybe if we could all just back up and pay more attention, that we might see amazing things. That within the disorder, we might bear witness to magic. That within these objects set into orbit, we might find a way to make sense of it all, so that as these singular objects shift and accumulate, whether for 8 days, 12 days, 14 days, 34 days, 67 days, or 99 days, we may be able to draw out classifications, taxonomies, based on fancy presentation, orderly trash, trash inside trash, technology, fashion, hygiene, intake assistance, travel and leisure, snack and food groups, seasonal, or the ironic cleaning and freshness-based trash, or trash from the stuff meant to kill things that are attracted to trash, who may one day become trash themselves. And perhaps as such, we may gain a better understanding of the universe itself, though this remains to be seen.
Yeah, incidentally, when the studio was flooded with sewage when I got it, and I remember my neighbors thanking me, like, oh, they called me Jimmy, you know. They're like, hey, Jimmy, thanks for cleaning up, you know, thanks for getting rid of the cockroaches, which I did. I had nightmares for a long time about cockroaches, and I did get rid of them. But there was this sort of disconnect, and like, how does that work? And it doesn't show up clearly in the video, but here are these kind of diagrams I started making, which I call dropping diagrams, which describe where the stuff is sitting. And if something moved, I would shift the location of it so you could see. And so, yeah, I did have sort of ways of labeling these things. Yeah, like anything that was a thing that could hold food was called a candy handle. And then there's poo. Good humor boxes. I took some liberties to be pretty loose or specific with this because it was really, ultimately, this was for me to not lose my mind because it was truly a lot of trash. And so I lived in this, so it's kind of divided in four. I lived in this apartment right here. That's my studio down there. And my neighbor, like as in cartoons, if you were going to throw trash off a cliff and it would just go there forever, they knocked a window out right here, and there's just a giant pile of trash right there. Like the biggest pile of trash in the world. And so I decided, and so I was going to do a residency in Belgium for a year, and I decided before I left I was going to literally get to the bottom of that pile. Because up until this point, I didn't disturb anything. I didn't move any trash. I left it completely unmolested, and I would just observe it, take pictures, and label it. But then I was like, all right, we've done this for a year. It's time, to start getting in there. And so I decided to set up a base of operations in my apartment, and then the survey region was over there. That's the stuff that I for multiple reasons, I couldn't figure out what was there because they were constantly there playing video games, and I could not possibly just walk over there and pick up the stuff. They'd be like, "What are you doing?" So I decided to do a sort of kind of sting operation thing. And so I set up in my apartment a kind of photo studio thing, and then took a picture from the roof of the stuff. So we had the layout of all the stuff, gridded it out, and then started labeling where everything was. And then I had some assistants helping me collect the stuff, note carefully where it was so we could put it back. And then, but we took pictures of it and put it back. Yeah, so we took pictures of everything. Everything up there was trash, including that. And there was some stuff that I didn't put back, but we took pictures of this stuff too. Yeah, I'm telling you, it was stinky. And then there's a sock. There's so much stuff, I can't even tell you. I have a huge just catalog of it. But there's a glove. It's amazing. And then there's the thing I'm unable to identify, but it is an amazing congealed item. And then with all these images that I took, that I was able to start to make classifications and create associations between them. So this one is P words, so it's like projectiles, protective, pokers, something else, propellers. Yeah, projectiles, yeah. So, and this one is sauces, swabs, and sauce caps. Yeah. Anyway, another thing happened there. So another interesting thing. So I'm sitting there during this time, I'm documenting stuff, it's all good, no problem. And then this hole develops, and a penny fell through it, and I was like, what? That, I know where that's going. My studio is downstairs, and I was like, there's got to be a way to, like, this is a gold mine of potential, like, stuff that is escaping the system into a black hole. And this black hole is like fair game. Like, I can keep this stuff. It's leaving the system. So I was like, I'm going to get that stuff, and I want to see it when more comes through it. But it wasn't easy. And all the while, mind you, this is while I'm not letting my neighbors know that I'm doing this, because if I did, it would change the entire, like, behavior, you know? So I wanted it to be completely unknown. So another thing about this studio, I'm just going on, because some of this stuff, like, is the way, I'm just trying to give you some insight into how my, generally, some of my work has developed. I'm showing it to you in a linear way, but it's not quite so linear. You know, it's really like life is happening, this is there, that's there, this is happening, that's happening. And I tried to keep involved in a lot of different projects. So this might be happening, and this might be happening, and this project might work out, that one might not, this one might. But you know, little did I realize that this thing was going to become its own thing. There were so many alley cats around this studio. People would feed the cats, and cats, if you don't know already, this is for you. Cats proliferate at a ridiculous rate. So within a year, 2 cats can create 12 cats, and within 2 years, that turns into 67, and that turns into 367, and yada yada. The reason this doesn't actually happen this way is because they die. They starve, they get killed, whatever. I found, like, yeah, I don't have any pictures for you of the dead cats that I found in the alleyway, but it was gross and depressing. So at some point I was like, okay, I'm going to do something about this, because my aim was to stay there for a while, and I didn't want to get depressed by my own studio. So I started to catch cats. And that is a cat trap. And the interesting thing about catching cats is that if a cat ever doesn't get caught by one of these traps, you will never catch that cat again with one of these traps, because they're smart. It figured out, like, if a cat figures out how to not get caught by this trap, or like somehow accidentally doesn't get caught by the trap, you can't use that trap on it again. It's just not going to go in there. So you have to figure out other crazy ways of catching the cats. And they have this thing, you ever watch Roadrunner? Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, where there's the trap, and there's a stick and a rope, and he pulls on the string, right? And then the stick falls, and the thing falls on somebody. So it's kind of like, there's a trap like that. It's like basically an upside down box that you can set up that is exactly that. There's a little stick, and you pull it, and the thing falls on the cat. So there's another, like, it's bigger. It's a lot bigger. It's like 8 by 8 feet. So, by the way, this is not to kill cats, in case anyone's really worried. This is to, like, I take them, there's a shelter in Los Angeles that would, and I didn't spay and neuter cats, by the way. I didn't do it. But I did take them to the place where they would do that, so that they would stop proliferating and stop being dead. These traps, they fall on, you can pull the string, it falls down and lands on the thing. And then what you end up doing, so you have this giant, like, 8 by 8 foot trap that's there, and it's open like that. It's not open, but it's not dark, right? And then you take one of these traps, and you cover it up with a blanket, and you put it there's a little hole there, and you put it there, and now this is a dark space, and then you pull up this little chute so the thing runs in there, and then it gets trapped in there. Haha. So that's how you do it. And I started thinking about, like, that's what they give you. They give you this whole thing, you know, and you sign up for it, and they give, if there's a problematic cat. And there was a cat that was getting pregnant over and over and over again, and I wanted to catch it. So I did. But I started thinking about this process of catching cats with a really big thing, and I was like, this is preposterous. You could totally just, you could divide the space into half, and then divide it into half again, and then divide it into half again, and then divide it into half again. And the whole time the cats are just lounging around, super comfortable. And I was, you know, until they're like, what? And that's the performance, yeah, that Wanju alluded to. I did that inside of the bar, but you could ostensibly do it anywhere. So I was kind of trying it out in this kind of way, you know? I don't know if anybody's ever played that game? Yeah? But you got to make your selection. You got to choose where you put the wall so that the cat doesn't get freaked out. It's also a little bit like that, if anyone knows that. Okay, so, and this is, I thought I'd throw some in here of this since Wanju talked about it, but this is a performance at the Mandrake, which was a cool, like, was doing great art stuff there. And eventually, and this, by the way, yeah, this is, at this bar, I'm catching my cat, who was an alley cat. I caught him as a kitten, and then he ended up being, you know, I caught, 3 kittens and ended up being my cats. So there's Mike. My cat Mike. Okay, so, happy ending. The thing that, the silver lining of this whole process was, this was work, and it was kind of like, man, okay, I'm going to streamline this conversation. There was a there was a show that was related to kind of architecture, that this was based on the work of Yona Friedman, and I was kind of like, it's a very utopic kind of idea that you can just, you know, you can, the idea of being able to put up your own, to make your own architectural structures and stuff, which is interesting. But the part that I felt like was missing from that was that there's no question about, like, who does that affect? Like, what if I build my thing? This is totally like a West Coasty idea, like of just being able to, like, go there and build something, and it's so cool, it's no problem. And, like, meanwhile, you're creating all these, like, spatial constraints on other people. And, like, maybe in this case, it was like I was just essentially creating like cat ghettos, you know, by like putting walls up and stuff. So in a way, some of this work, and I think this shows up in other places, is essentially doing things that I think are actually pretty problematic in some way. Trying to create some sort of illustration of, like, you could do this, you know? I mean, this is artwork. You know, this is kind of like saying, like, I don't know. It's not necessarily trying to find solutions, you know, but it's also trying to maybe ask, like, is this normal? You know? So... but one of the great things that came out of this was that the cats started helping me make work, and so I started making these paintings, which I was, here's Mike again. These are giant cat scratchers, and these ones aren't so giant, but these are cat scratchers. So I started assembling cat scratchers, you know, not the rope kind, but the cardboard kind. So the cardboard kind that you put there and the cat scratches it. And I started calling these feline aural signatures. Aural as in A-U-R-A-L, they're aura, you know. It was basically they're creating their imprint on this work. And so these were Kool-Aid and catnip is involved in this. And so the catnip I'm pushing into the cardboard to induce the urge to scratch. So yes, I'm using, anyway, it's a little bit of a cat druggy induced, so I'm kind of like playing off this idea of like sort of like hippie aesthetics, and kind of like also like the cats are involved in this somehow. And so I'm doing, this is like this kind of classic tie-dye pattern. Yeah. And so here's another classic that's Mike. Then there's this classic Guatemalan kind of style textile thing here. And that's Valerie Bertinelli right there. And that's based on the shirt of Eddie Van Halen, who was wearing that shirt. Okay. So then, who was the partner of Valerie Bertinelli, who was a teenage idol while I was a child? All right. So then, so you get these kind of things, right? And they're floating, and they're basically open back screen. They're like, they look like a filter or something. You can see through it. So this happened, and that was all fine and good. And time came and went. This stuff was happening while other things were happening. And I was still interested in this stuff. And, but at some point, I started getting, okay, look at this for a while. All right, this is an image that's supposed to make you feel sick. Just saying. It is, that's what they say. This image will make you feel sick. So I was kind of interested in this. This is related to the containery thing. I was interested in things that can kind of trick your brain into feeling one way or another. I was interested in seasickness, actually, and thinking about the way you can get, can you power through it somehow by telling yourself something different, you know? Maybe, I don't know. Like there's some super physical thing happening here when I look at it. I don't like looking at it. But there's also like this total optical illusion thing here. And then there's this. I was interested in the way that these cat scratchers are these structures that are extremely, like there's a formula there. They're straight. And so I was like interested in ways of like playing with that stuff and making these kind of like seasickness kind of images. And so I was making more scratchers like this kind of thing. And, snake kind of vibes and stuff. But the problem was I no longer was at that studio. I no longer had the cats. So I was like suddenly at odds with how to like reproduce this kind of like cat scratchery situation. So I was like, no problem. I'm going to get some tiger claws and make a way to scratch these things. And so I had these kind of like designs for a cat scratcher apparatus. I ordered claws online. You can get anything online. And I had these kinds of plans. This is a good one. That'll give you an actual like scratch pull kind of thing. Is this? Yeah, okay. I tried this. Super dangerous, by the way. All right, so that gave that. So later, I ended up coming up with this kind of thing, the clawsaw, and then, excuse me, assembled this. This was essentially kind of like a self-portrait size thing, and this, again, you can see through it. It's like my, kind of like my height and wingspan. And so it's kind of like that. That's it. Marlborough Chelsea. This is, okay, moving on. So I was kind of interested in also these kinds of, I'm skirting around the container thing still, I was interested in, like I looked at a lot of maps and I thought a lot about where I could go, and looked at a lot of images of ports and land and things like that, and started thinking of, you know, at some point looking at these things serially, I started thinking of all of these things, no matter what size the continent was, as islands, because they are. And so I got interested in kind of recreating these kinds of things. I approached it many different ways. I wanted to make some images, and I wanted to make some representations of islandy spaces. One of the things I did was like this Japanese printmaking technique in water, and started making these topographical drawings with that. They're completely chance-based, so you have no way of controlling what the print is going to look like. These are prints, so I'm basically dropping this stuff into water and coming up with these crazy landformy kind of things. Trying to think of what these are called. Anyway, they're all labeled with topographical marks. So I was really interested in this topographical thing, though, where somehow this appealed to my sense of like spatial, something was going on here where the spatial representation of height is there, but it's still a flat image, right? But there's so many ways of representing that spatiality, like this sort of like height and dimension of things. And so I was interested in kind of breaking that down. And I think one of the things, again, like one of the things that interested me was how to maybe come to some new understanding of anything, really. But I did. I'll explain it in a second. So these prints, I just made a ton of these. These are some of them. Yeah. Okay. At some point, okay, so these are ink on paper. And then this here is also ink on paper. So I started doing this other thing, like lakes are kind of like the inverse of an island, right? So it's the water is going down instead of the land coming up, right? So you get the same situation upside down. And I started thinking about that. Wow, that's interesting. What really interested me is like making these images. I did this series that I called Island Effects. And I was kind of like interested in like the idea of like kind of tongue-in-cheek, the idea of special effects, and also you know, the island effect. Again, dealing with islands, it has to do with kind of like inbred mentality, like inbreeding, right? Is in place on islands. Like there's like higher chance of like
founder effect.
Founder effect. What's the island effect?
Well, I think the founder effect is the same thing, is it's like about someone going to an island.
Right.
And the people have like the same disease as that person.
Right. Word. Yeah. Okay. So the genetic pool is small, so you end up like with this great chance of having recessive genes. Blah blah. All this sciencey stuff. What's my point there? I guess what was interesting here for me was this idea of creating these images and coming up with different representations of space, spatial height, and island kind of forms, but doing it in a way that's kind of like tricky. And so that's where that image came from. So basically it's ink on paper. I just filled up paper with ink and then took a picture of it, right? And then I'm dealing with evaporation. So these things are starting to evaporate, create rings. So I'm coming up with all these cool like images of landscapes and stuff like that, you know. And this was helped along by the flavor injector. And then I started asking myself if maybe there's another way to do it. So I was like, I got to get a little bit more, like change the scale slightly and do something different. Because, you know, when you're working on stuff, you come up with a different need at some point. So I picked up one of these kiddie pools and kind of gave it some, murdered out kind of thing on the side. And I ended up filling it up with sand and I ended up creating, started making these things. So this is paint on canvas. So what that is, you're seeing multiple rings of paint on canvas. The canvas is submerged underwater, and I've painted a ring, I've spray painted color on the thing each time, and then filled it up with another centimeter of water. So each time you get another ring, and then there's all this residue on top that starts giving these kind of like things. And so I was like just interested in these kind of Loch Ness monster-y, vague, shots of like kind of aerial photography. And then what I was really interested in was ultimately not just, these images were cool, but I wasn't what I was after. What I was interested in was the link between those two, between the image, the sort of aerial photography, video, whatever image, and the actual 2D representation of that image. And that's what you get when you take it out of the water, you end up with the rings. So in some way I came up with this way of describing what the form was and creating the 2D map of it while making the aerial images. So to me that seemed like an interesting thing. And I kind of tried it, again, I'll show you a quick, oops. I want to just, I basically started, it becomes more clear later. I started layering, every layer I gave another round. I went around the island each time. This is a shortened version of it, but it's basically like each time I filled it up, I spray more, I fill it up, and the island gets smaller and smaller. So that you start to see it disappear. So it started out as a big canvas, a lot of medium there to keep it, kind of like whatever I could do to keep that thing in a form. And then what you end up with, in this case, was this print. So that's again on canvas, and each layer is there. You can see it each time. I'm going to skip over this stuff. How are we doing on time? Let's see. Probably okay. Oh wait, it's 9. Okay. All right, cool. So I did something in, I did a thing in Bakersfield with some students there where they were to help me put together a show. And Bakersfield is a crazy place, Bakersfield, California. I don't know if anyone's been there. Has anyone been there? It's crazy. It's like you go down the mountain and like the smog is insane. It's very, very, like it's a valley. It's the ending point of The Grapes of Wrath. If anyone's read that book, which is like, if you should read that book, it's good. So anyway, it's really dry, and I was interested in all these kind of forms that are, again, like sort of as a continuation of this sort of island effect thing. I was interested in all these dry, all these things that you could find on the map that ended up being actually like this, or vice versa. Like this is total desert land here, or this kind of thing, which is in the middle of the desert, but it's actually like kind of a, fancy location, Or this kind of thing, which looks like square lakes, but it's actually, it's like a mine, Another one of these kind of things going on. So all these things kind of layered on top of each other, super interesting. And the mission there is kind of I taught it, so it's a little out of order, but I wanted to try to get onto some of this water, if there was water, and somehow I felt like being able to access spaces, whether they're condoned or not, is somehow some sort of like agency. And I had, skip over that. In the process of doing this, we ended up shooting all these spaces. I shot these spaces. And has anyone ever seen this kind of surf cam thing that exists? You can see the conditions of different surf areas. So I thought that was interesting, these continuous like live cameras everywhere. And so I decided to make one for the desert. And I had started in, oh, is that playing? It's not, right? Okay. I don't know if it matters. Here we go. Into the void. Right, okay. Boom. So there, so it's just this footage of this stuff, of these water places in the desert that are not surfable. But I had taught a class at UCLA where it was a sculpture class, and I had everybody build boats, and then we took them to the beach and launched them. And so I kind of decided to continue on with this idea, and they didn't need to, they just needed to be able to sustain your own, they didn't exactly have to float, but they did have to not totally sink and just sort of sustain you there. And I'll show you that in a second, but this anyway was a continuation of that kind of idea, where I then ended up interview. I then ended up going getting the class together to try to create a boat. And we brainstormed different stuff. I had a lot of boat, these things are things that I collected, and just like, just different ideas of how you can make something float. They all work. So, I don't know, I was just kind of interested in doing it as a team, and like doing it as if we're like at MIT or something, like just kind of tongue-in-cheek, like we're making a boat. And we ended up like with these barrels. I have other pictures that are, unfortunately this is the only one I grabbed, but like where they're all kind of like wearing lab coats and stuff, and we're making this thing, and it's buckets, And we took it to the Salton Sea, which is a huge, crazy body of water of dead fish, basically. It's the biggest inland, this is not possible, it's the biggest inland body of water in the United States.
Man-made?
Huh?
Man-made, maybe?
Maybe man-made. I mean, the Great Lakes are bigger, but this is big. This is very big. And it's there's some statistic there, man-made, or maybe not exiting somehow. It's all going in. It's all going in. It's all polluted by fertilizer. It's all like agriculturally screwed. And so it keeps going in. This was a huge vacation. This is off topic, I guess. Anyway, look it up. It's very interesting, but it's really gross. And so we got in there, and then we all tooled around in that thing. It's very nice. So this is the class I alluded to, the Meta Surf Club. I'm going to just show you really quickly just some pictures from that, because they're so cool. Yeah. Oh, that's not it. Whoops. Yeah. Full screen. Huh? Bottom, thank you. Thank you. This one didn't float. Oh, there's the picture. Kind of like, there's one of them. They're kind of like preparing the bucket. That's amazing. That's amazing too. All right. This guy just, all right. Anyway, pretty cool. So the reason I'm showing you this stuff is that some of this, my practice started to involve, like I started to become more interested in these kinds of like group dynamic-y things, bringing in students and others to like somehow be involved in this process. And so this also happened here. I had my class assemble an IKEA dresser, and it took, you know how it takes you a second to figure out how to do the dresser, to figure out how to do the stuff with IKEA stuff before you understand it, and then you get it and it starts to go faster. But I had everybody make to do 2 steps in the thing, so it was extremely slow. It took us 8 hours to build it collectively. But again, I wanted it to be kind of a, you know, take it really seriously. And I think, I don't know, it's just an interesting part about this sort of standardized, the way of describing how to do things that are like standardized, and the standardized way of describing how to do things that are standardized. And so this is one more thing. Didn't work at first. Any familiar with this kind of problem? So yeah, there it is. It's the Tarva. Oh God, it did it again. Can't handle it. Can't handle this picture. That's so cool. Yeah. Eat your heart out, MIT, over there. Neighboring MIT. Okay, great. So, moving on. This, one more thing I wanted to show you from the group dynamic world. I had a group basically ask them to create a chain reaction of events, and had them sort of like figure out, this again, it's students, them, and figure out, build 2 stages of some sort of, you know what a Rube Goldberg machine is? Thing that keeps going. One thing feeds the next. And so they figure out, take the input of one thing, and it has to power your thing and go do another thing, and then do another thing. And then you have to figure out what the exit is, whatever yours is putting out, and then that goes to somebody else. So it's like this tag team thing, right? Kind of an exquisite corpse of motion. And yeah, so we put that together, and I decided to shoot it as a kind of final outcome. Let me try to play this. It goes very, very slowly, which I apologize for, but the beginning's really nice. This, I mean, the whole thing's nice, but this part's amazing, this thing. That thing fell into a kiddie pool through a piece of glass covered with a beach sand scene, and then created a tie-dye onto a shirt. And then this thing is going down. Yeah. Go faster. It became like an editing fiasco, you know, of kind of coming up. Whoop. I'm going to show you the outtakes. They're a little more exciting and fast. Yeah, the whole thing came together. It was a little bit of an exercise of trying to make something seem like it works even though it doesn't. And that somehow seemed interesting. There were aspects of it that did work. That first part was working. But like to me, it didn't really matter. It was sort of this overall kind of filmic kind of result that you're left with. All right. So next, there's this. There's one more group exercise I want to tell you about. First, I'm going to show you the thing that I've been tiptoeing around. This project. I don't need to say anything. I'll just show it.
This map that you're looking at is one that I took across the Atlantic Ocean from the United States to Marseille, France, as I'm attempting to modify the interior of a standard shipping container in the fashion of one of Le Corbusier's standard lodging units, as seen in the Unité d'Habitation, with the ultimate goal of shipping myself internationally. Many similarities still exist between the two forms, as the Unité d'Habitation was made to resemble a large cruise ship. This is an image that I took from a catalog offering worldwide itineraries aboard luxurious cruise ships. They call this room the balcony stateroom. Does this shape look familiar? This trip took 2 weeks' time, during which I was able to get to know some of the limitations of standardized travel. How standardized cargo is affixed to the hull in ways which could prevent doors from opening or obstruct balcony views, and how essential needs could be supplied to and evacuated from each pod, and how loading and unloading sequences must be kept in mind in order to carry out smooth transfers from one mode of transport to another. That is to say that it's not necessary that travel be bound to a bulky frame, bound to make the same trip again and again. Yes, the future is bright indeed. Of course, this strategy allows for mobile habitation along any variety of intermodal transport mechanisms, and the handling of these boxes is rigidly regulated, so that regardless of what's on the interior, optimal corporations can consistently maintain a fluid relationship to methods or corporations. This proposes an existence running alongside and between innumerable goods flowing simultaneously to assemble massive networks. So what if our spatial relationships were no longer tied to governmental or economic forces or obscured by our geographic objectivity, but were determined by our own welfare in relation to all other astrological bodies in motion, in conjunction with biorhythmic and climactic cycles affecting our experiences? Let's just see.
All right. So a couple years ago, then I've gone through various versions of how to approach this project. I came to a point of having a shipping company offer its ships to me, and in 2007, immediately before the crash, which hit the shipping industry. very hard. Like banks in the shipping industry were nailed by this. And so they kind of like completely restructured, and that little promise disappeared. And I haven't seen it since. And, but yeah, so there are these different versions of things that kind of materialized, kind of like came into focus, came out of focus. Things have changed. The tiny house movement did not exist, and then suddenly that's a thing. And so that sort of has really changed the way I look at this project. Like sort of in 2006, this was kind of like much kookier, I think. It might have existed, maybe the tiny homes thing. I don't know if it did, but I sure wasn't getting wind of it. This project I came up with, again, it was like a class project asking students to come up with a set of modules that would create an entire living environment. So let me see. Again, due to a computer problem, I am going to show you these this way. So yeah, this is Buckminster Fuller, and he at some point did a project where he had students devise a way to fit all the stuff from a house into one truck container shape. And so these are all the chairs and appliances and blah 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 in that form. So I took that and it's called the Standard of Living Package Model, and I kind of took this as a springboard for this project, which is the shit hits the fan habitable element grid module cluster encampment prototype. So it's basically, and I changed that name later to be a little bit shorter. But this was I was asking, I changed it to box set. It's a little shorter. So I was asking students this was like sort of, I wanted to see this as a prototype for how to design the interior of the container. And I was kind of like already playing with these ideas, and I wanted to see how students would kind of deal with this as a group, as a sort of like thinking, collective mind. And so I was asking them to each design a 30-inch cube, so a 2.5-foot cube, that would be modular by function, that would be usable in any configuration within a grid, would be adaptable to shifting and unpredictable environment, spatial motion, resource availability. So these are like a lot of the problems that come up if you were to be moving around in a container. There are a lot of problems to consider. So I was trying to boil this down to like a few that could make sense, that people could wrap their heads around and try to come up with some solution for. And it would have, the module would have to make sense to transport, otherwise just throw it away. So if it's nonsense, if it's going to be a thing that's got like a doily in it or something, like that's nice, but I'm not bringing it. And so we had these design kind of discussions. I tried, we tried breaking down what the stuff was, what the needs were, and then boiling it down in some way. Like, how can we like come up with some sort of way of describing these needs and what they are, and then how can you articulate them with a thing? And is that sculptural? I don't know. But so we started building these frames for the stuff. And like this, for example, so one of the needs, for example, is to, as we determined, was to filter water somehow. And so, and there are more than what, and like, what if you're in shade? You can't use the sun. And what if you're you don't have this certain thing, then you can't use that. What if you don't have this? You know, what if you're in motion? You can't, you know. One version included this, you know, ceramic item that was definitely going to break. It weighed like a lot. It was really heavy, and this was a distiller that didn't work. But it was a really nice effort, but it didn't make the cut. And then this was a sort of solar stove that does work. We had a lot of fun with electronics. It's really kind of an interesting problem of having, like, trying to heat something with low power. You know, we were trying to use like battery power and solar power and have it be, and absurdly, so like that's a very low amount of power. And then to absurdly also, do you remember that huge power plug in the video that showed like the power coming into the container? Like this very high voltage, three-phase power that goes into shipping containers that you could use, like, you know, trucks use it, and, you know, so you could charge this stuff from that, but it's like an absurdly excess amount of power. So this is the puzzled look. So testing. Oh yeah, and ultimately the goal was to be able to create these modules, and what we were going to do with them was load them into a U-Haul and then take them off and test them, you know, which we did. So all these things had relationships to each other. So similar to the Rube Goldberg machine, where one thing has an output and leads to it becomes the input of the other thing. This is also tying, like one thing goes to the other, and there's no right way to do it. There's no single way to do it. But ultimately, you end up figuring out what's happening and what actually is leading to what. And I had people try to model these. Yay! That was just for, okay, I think that's it. And then, say what? Okay, I'll finish up right now. So then I basically started describing these things, that like how do these things flow into one another. And basically the last thing I'm going to show you is the final result of this thing. I ended up exhibiting, so I ended up taking the work of students and showing it I exhibited it in Los Angeles. So they were all part of the show, which was really interesting. And then, here we go, presenting. We ended up with these modules. So I kind of made cuts and decided what was going to be in this show. And these are all the elements that sort of became a part of it. And then to describe, and so this is the sort of rendering of it at some point. And then to describe how these things work, I ended up making a diagram. I called it a nodal schematic diagram. Each thing was a node. Each thing had a function, and ended up making this thing out of neon. And each one basically shows its function. Hello. So each of the colors shows a certain type of flow, like that's the person, the bod, then there's power, supplies, sky, heat, stuff, hard objects, Audi, And then like, so each thing leads to another thing. The blue, for example, is water flow. The red is power. You know, each thing has its own representation. And that is all I have. Sure. Yeah.
We have questions for Jen?
I wonder like what you like see as like your relationship just to like maybe like confusion, right? Like, because it feels like that sort of maybe like at the center of all the work you're kind of making, right?
Yeah, maybe. I never thought of it that as confusion. Yeah, I guess that's a good question. I mean, I feel like I'm interested in the, I see a lot of things, especially earlier, as like frustrations, you know, and like things that I'm like, like why, you know? And if I could ask why, then I felt like I could ask like more questions than that. And maybe some of it, like, I think sometimes work for me and others I've heard could possibly be a way of processing things in the world, you know? Like a way of interpreting, like giving yourself a process to work through to come to some terms or understanding with, you know, of what exists, what really is there. I don't expect to be able to change things, you know? I think it's possible to change things, but I don't single-handedly have that aim. But I do think it's possible to sort of like point to things that are maybe a little weird and have people go like, maybe we could reconsider that. You know, that's kind of what I think is maybe interesting about it. You know, I'm not trying to like, confusion. I don't know. Even like, I don't think.
Or maybe like absurdity is like a word that wants you to use too, which is like, you're like connected, right? This is rubbing against each other. Yeah, I mean, absurdity for sure. Like, there's a lot of stuff, you know. I think it's partially just like, why do you want to make work? You know, is there a reason? For me, if there isn't a reason, like, it doesn't have to be a deep reason, it just is a reason, you know? Like, I think it's interesting that this Abflex thing has a piece of bread on top of it. I'm going to take a picture of that, you know? That's like, I don't know. Somehow, also, I think that just dealing with things that are physical, for me, has a deep importance in 2019 because nobody's doing that anymore. You know, I think it's a dying act. You know, everybody's on their phones. You know, not that there's anything wrong with that, but we're losing touch with our relationship with reality. And whatever reality, like tactile reality, you know? And so I see it as a form of like agency to be able to like delve into the physical and also to question these spatial things, I guess. Yeah. Anyway. Does that answer your question, or does that make sense? Yeah, definitely.
Word.
I wrote down in a notebook like global and local, you know, clearly, but I remember reading about how, you know, at a certain point, agrarian society, you had like a local mill, you had a local steel mill, you know, everything was sort of localized. Mm-hmm. And as we built up, all of a sudden there is not a local manufacturer of something. You know, we can't fabricate, there's an article at the Times today, we can't build laptops in the States because we can't manufacture all the parts. I was curious what you were like, there's a clear sort of trajectory here from like the local of, this is my studio block, this is my building, these are my neighbors, these are my friendly neighborhood cats, to like shipping containers.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think To me, they're related. Yeah. To me, like even like it was a little tongue-in-cheek moment there, but to me, even like the penny, the movement of these objects in the local in the locale, things moving around. To me, it somehow like why not relate that to the movement of the planets and like our sort of astrological sensibilities or whatever we think that is. Like somehow the local and the global, I think, extends beyond the global. I don't think it's confined to that. But you're right. Yeah, like I think there's a scale thing, and I think that's interesting. I think there's also there's a sense. Again, you can do something about the stuff around you to a degree, and then there's a point where it's like it's out of your control. And I think if, it's just interesting to try to find your part in that, find your way through that, Like I think looking at your neighbors dropping trash, you could get up in there and change it. You could be a complete tool and go in there. You could try to do something, but it's not really going to change anything. That's my opinion. I don't think it's really my place or my desire to go in and like fix that stuff, fix it. Like it's not wrong. It's just that's how it is. And same thing with the global economy. It's fucked up. It's very It's very messed up. It's very problematic. There's so many things that are problematic, and the container project in particular brings up so many interesting questions. Interesting, but like so many big problems. And again, there are things that hopefully it alludes to, hopefully it draws attention to, overtly or not overtly. Hopefully it just makes people think about some stuff that's like, yeah, what about human trafficking? What about this? All these things that are like definitely going on that are like a huge problem in our global economy. And I think there's some relationships between the problems that exist in the studio and in the neighborhood, and so maybe the studio, that's a stretch. I mean, I can control things in my studio. Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing all this work.
Thanks for caring.
Yeah.
No, just kidding.
It strikes me that the thing that I really respond to is that it's we're not just looking at independent images that are kind of located. And I showed here and this. Here's this independent discrete object. Instead, it's systemic. And there's so many aspects of what we're looking at that involve real logistical, financial, and social difficulties. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, and something that really rings a bell for me is looking at the sketches that, like the calculus of how much beer can fit in a certain space. It just looks so familiar in terms of like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Using math and kind of being able to pin down the numbers. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about means by which you are able to convince yourself to do something, even though it's really, like, odds are against it ever happening.
Hey.
Well, I mean,
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
How dare you? No. That's a good, that's a big question.
Yeah.
That's a big question. And my answer has changed over time because, I started at that project in particular being like, let's do this, and pretty convinced that it was going to happen in like 2 years, and it didn't. It almost did happen in 2 years, but it didn't. And then it really didn't. It's like it didn't happen yet, and I think, at some point I had to reckon with the fact that I had 3 enormous projects that were still not done. I had the meatpacking plant, I had the stage, and I had the shipping container thing going. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, what am I doing wrong? You know, I'm not, like, if I were like Chris Burden or something, it'd be done, like, it'd be like, yeah, check that off, check that one off. You know, like people with a big budget and like the means and sort of support behind them to like sort of make something happen. It's, you know, even well-known artists have, like, I love seeing things like proposals by artists that are like, didn't work. I love seeing that stuff because it's like, you know, it's just part of the it's part of what you have to do. And like, I think the more important question for me is like, not is it going to get done? Because I really do, like, I still think it can, you know, and will. But I don't think that's the important question. I think the important question is like, why do I want to do this? And like, is it important to me? And is it worth my time and energy? You know, that's a big question that I didn't ask early on. Like, is it worth my time and energy? Because if I would have asked that question about the stage, probably not. No, I don't think that was worth my time and energy. Like, it was worth something, but I think I would have early on been like, all right, I'm going to scrap most of this right now and just be like, pick some parts. But there's no way to know that in advance. There's no way. I mean, I still wish it would have, the whole thing would have toured, you know? That would have been amazing. I had the Sculpture Center, like, we were talking about it, and the thing was 3 feet bigger than the Sculpture Center. And I was like, can you, like, I didn't say can you, I said, let's just take the wall out. I was like, let's just open the, like, into the courtyard there, you know? I was like, let's just remove that part of the wall, and this will be the coolest thing, you know? I still think it would have been, and it didn't happen, you know? Just, it's part of, like, I mean, you have to believe that what you're doing is important, and you have to believe that it makes sense, or is, like, something about it that is driving you. But I don't think it has to, it's probably not going to go the way you think it does if you're working large. And that's part of, too, like, I think why it's important for me to have other things, like, I'm not just showing you, like, this is the one big thing, but I have all these other things that are, like, within my power, like, that are self-contained inquiries that I can get into that are going to allow me to have a practice that isn't going to make me wait for an assistant to show up so I can move something across the studio, you know, because that's impossible. And it's not affordable for me anyway. Yeah. But yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks. All right. Thank you all.